Hi, everyone. I'm Nicole Barbano, and welcome to the Hunter Ambrose Podcast. Today, we are joined by someone who is just absolutely incredible, Leslie Mahoney, RN. With over 50 years in nursing, Leslie's career spans generations of change, from her early days working in a Catholic hospital to serving as the director of an ICU at a Level 1 trauma center in California. And later, through her career as a surveyor for the California Department of Public Health, and then concluding her career in hospice. Leslie has seen it all. The transformation of nursing uniforms, which we're going to talk about, to the evolution of ICU leadership and the ongoing challenges and triumphs of women in healthcare leadership. We're also going to talk about Leslie's first job, her journey through leadership, the future of nursing post-2020, and whether the mass exodus from healthcare is a lost cause or a challenge we can still overcome. Leslie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Nicole. I'm happy to be here.
So you've shared some stories with me through the years, and I've had the honor of sharing those stories with others. So for everyone who listens to the Hunter Ambrose podcast, we're going to start with, tell us about your first nursing job and what was it like, and what do you remember? What's that story?
My first nursing job was actually at the hospital that I graduated from. I went to a 3-year hospital-based program. And I worked in the operating room, I found the operating room fascinating, and I wanted to be there. It was very different in those days.
And what day is this? What year are we talking?
64, 65. Okay. So long career. The interesting thing about that particular position was you had to be on call once a week. So you worked your day shift, and then you were on call until the next day. You were paid $15 to be on call. Flat $15. If you were lucky, you slept all night. If you were not lucky, you were up all night and you got $15, period. Very different from today's salary and today's regulations.
So when you were in the OR, what were some of those cases? And did you feel prepared coming out of nursing school? Were you scrubbing, circulating? How complex were the cases in 64?
They were very complex. We did not do open heart surgery. But I will tell you that one of the physicians that was on staff at that hospital was Dr. Heimlich, famous for the Heimlich maneuver, famous for the Heimlich valve. Dr. Heimlich had worked in Vietnam. He had seen a lot of trauma, a lot of chest tubes, and he developed the Heimlich valve, which really was a wonderful safety device for chest tubes.
And what hospital was this?
New Rochelle Hospital.
Okay.
In New Rochelle, New York.
Beautiful.
Which has now been taken over by Montefiore, which is a huge hospital. It was huge back then. It's even larger now.
Go back to your first nursing job for a moment and think about that first year, those first few months. What did you just wish that somebody would have told you, taught you, mentored you on to have made it a bit of a more smooth onboarding process?
I actually think the onboarding process was great. You did a lot of orientation. You oriented to a certain type of surgery, and then you scrubbed on those surgeries until you became really, really good and got to know the doctors. And there was always a mentor. So I remember the first time I was scrubbing on a neuro case. I had never done a neuro case. And I had a senior nurse with me who walked me through the entire process, was there, stood right in front of me so that when the doctor asked for an instrument that perhaps I didn't know, she pointed to it. So I think the onboarding in the OR in those days was absolutely wonderful. I felt very prepared and very supported, and that was a great experience. It really was.
That's a level of mentoring, and we'll get into it later, but I'm not sure that's a level of mentoring that exists today.
I think it depends on the hospital. I think it depends on the director of your unit. I think onboarding is one of the most important things that a hospital is going to do. The hospital is investing in staff, and that investment pays off if you do it correctly. If you not only have skilled mentors to mentor people, but you have a definite idea of what that mentorship should be. So I think it's important during the orientation process, during the onboarding process, that the director of the area meet with the new staff and find out how they're doing. That is something that further down in my career, when I was director of the ICU, I had a clinical nurse specialist that developed a wonderful mentorship program for new people. And she met with new people once a week along with their preceptor. And then I met with the new person
Okay.
to see
Well,
how they were doing.
I'm gonna cut you off there because we are gonna talk about that position, but I'm not gonna let you off the hook without having this story. And the
Yes.
story I want you to tell us and to tell all of our listeners is the time that you and your fellow RNs, now back in the day, you had to wear the nurse's uniform it was a
It was a
dress,
dress.
and you wanted to wear pants.
Yes, we
Tell
did.
us about what the nurse's uniform of the 1960s was and how you and your fellow cohorts finally convinced, I believe it was a nun who was your CNO, to
Yes.
wear pants.
Yes.
Tell us the whole magical story. Yes.
So when I graduated, you wore a white dress uniform, white hose, white shoes, and a cap, period. Fast forward, it in certain situations was very impractical because you were working in tight spaces. Your cap got caught on the curtain. The cap served no purpose. I mean, we loved our caps, but it just over the years was not practical. So we decided that we didn't want to wear caps. We were excused from wearing caps in the ICU because the space was tight. And then we decided, why can't we wear pantsuits? Because we're climbing up on beds when we do CPR. We're having to push heavy beds around the hospital. We're reaching over from gurneys to bed, transferring patients. And it just wasn't practical not to be wearing pants. So we were told no, we couldn't wear pants.
Wait,
We
and
started
who
a
told you
petition.
no? Who was the power be that told you no?
Well, our director of the area, who represented the administration, it was a Catholic hospital. There were nuns, and the answer was no. So we started a petition. Actually, some of the doctors signed it. I remember one of the doctors signing it and saying that he thought we should wear mini skirts.
Charming.
Yes. So we passed this petition from shift to shift. Unfortunately, the night supervisor got wind of it. She went up to the floor. She found out who had the petition, and she demanded that it be given to her. And she was very intimidating. And so they handed the petition to her. The next thing we knew, we were called to a meeting. 5 of us were called to a meeting with the nun who ran the hospital. And I remember one of the nurses, who was older and wiser, started the meeting by reading the prayer of St. Francis, that God be with us, help us to change the things we could change and to accept the things we couldn't change.
I know where this is going.
Anyway, the nun listened to us. She was upset with us. We were upset with her, but there was so much that the nurses wanted in other ways that they weren't going to give us, that they gave on the pantsuits, and we were allowed to wear pantsuits. But it took quite the confrontation.
Well, there's a PG-13 too, Leslie, that you've told that involved a particular RN with her stockings and her garter belts doing CPR right when the sister was walking by. Yeah.
Yes. Well,
Was that you?
again, uniforms weren't down to your ankles. I mean, they were knee length. And so you hop up on a bed and you're kneeling there doing CPR, bending over. And in those days, we wore garter belts with nylons. And I'm sorry, the garter belts, the nylons didn't come up to the top of your thigh. And so it all shows. When you bend over, it all shows. And that was something that was horrifying. And I think that the nuns and people finally realized this is ridiculous. It doesn't seem possible nowadays that you would have to go to such lengths to be allowed to wear pants. But yes, back in the day of the horse and buggy.
Absolutely. Well, kudos and a shout out to the doctor who signed the petition for you guys for mini skirts in the 60s. I mean, what a character he must have been.
Yes.
Okay, so we're going to pivot to your time as director of the ICU. And this is a level 1 trauma center that's been renamed. And I want to give some geographical context to this. So this is in California. You started your career in New York, you get to California, you're married, you got kids at this point. This is what, early 70s? Okay. So this is in Fresno. Now, what's important about Fresno to note is that to the north, we have San Francisco by about 3 hours. To the south, we have Los Angeles by about 3 hours. Why this is important is in the 70s, and really so much actually today, Fresno is the largest county between the largest counties in California. And you have mountain passes, you have inclement weather. Having that level 1 trauma center in Fresno was incredibly important because if you didn't have it, you're getting shipped off to San Francisco or to Los Angeles. This is life and death moments. So you later became director of the ICU at Valley Medical Center, VMC as it was called back in the day. What was that transition like for you? And what were some of the biggest challenges that you faced as what was really your first leadership position? So tell us the year, tell us about the unit, and tell us the story.
It was actually 80, and the ICU was new. It was 24 beds, which it was not completely staffed. It was broken into the CCU and the medical intensive care unit. I had become a single parent. I had also had back surgery. So being a staff nurse, lifting patients was out of the question. I was offered the position as director of the MICU, and I took the position. This was staff that I worked alongside of. So the transition from being a staff nurse and being a cohort to being their boss was difficult. It was difficult for me and it was difficult for them.
Why?
I also,
Like, I want to go back to the why with this. Why was it difficult for them? Why was it difficult for you?
it was difficult for them because now I was their boss and I was telling them what to do, as opposed to just being another staff nurse. And they challenged. For example, there was a wedding one day and they all called in sick for the night shift. It was a joke, but it wasn't a joke to me because I didn't know whether they were going to show up or not. They did show up, but it was kind of a ha-ha moment for them. And I had to talk to them about it afterwards and say, you can't do things like that. It was hard because to say to one nurse in particular that I was good friends with, your behavior is unacceptable. She was a very strong RN. She was a very good RN, but she liked to intimidate people. And we were trying to recruit staff. And people literally would not come to the unit because of her. And that had to stop.
Okay, I'm going to stop there for a moment. I've been recruiting in healthcare for 20 years. What does an RN do that intimidates others that you see as the most common behavior traits?
They don't help them when they need help. They're critical of them. They're rude to them. They give curt answers. Like if someone says, well, I don't understand this arrhythmia, instead of helping them, they say, that's your responsibility. Figure it out. Nursing for a long time has had a reputation of eating their young. And so instead of welcoming new staff and mentoring them, they're critical of them. And that turns people off and then they don't want to work with you. So developing, again, those onboarding processes where you welcome new staff is important. And particularly because we needed to recruit staff to fully staff a 24-bed intensive care unit. And anything that interfered with that had to stop. So that was part of my job.
Looking back to working with reprimanding, putting people on PIPs, whatever the common HR jargon is of today, like, do you remember your first difficult conversation with an RN where like, you're going to get fired if this doesn't stop? And you're a very direct human being. And I'm going to throw in that you are also, I think, second generation Irish Catholic. So we'll just from New York, right? And so you're in California, it's 1980. I don't know that it was as PC as it is now, but walk the dog on that for me. Your first tough conversation of you've got an RN, his or her behavior is not changing. You want to fire them. What I know that happened on so many instances for you.
And it was a learning experience for me. The first time I confronted someone on their behavior, I was not PC, but I also had not been mentored on how to handle things where you criticize the action and not the person. And that was something I had to learn. I was very fortunate. I had a wonderful boss who sat me down and said, no, you did this incorrectly. You criticize actions, you don't criticize people. That's not your job. And so it was something I had to learn down with people in the future. I stuck to the action that did not follow policy and procedure or nursing practice, what was wrong, and what I expected. That worked very well.
In
There were
there
people who
because
could accept that, and there were people who couldn't.
part of leadership today that I find some curiosity with is that it's kind of like taking the psychotherapy approach, right? Like the essence of psychotherapy is that you wait for the patient to come to their own conclusion and answers, even if it takes 7 years. That Let's just put that to the wayside for a moment. But there's also a lot of leadership where leaders don't want to say, this is what you're doing. This is what I need you to do. How does that get modified? This is the policy. This is the procedure. We want them to find their own Easter eggs along the way to come to their conclusion, regardless of the muckery in the midst. What was your leadership style? Did you want them to find their own way? Or were you more direct of this is the way it's going to be done?
I was more direct, especially when it dealt with patient care. So I had a nurse, worked in the unit. We had certain policies with IVs, what drugs could be hung together and what couldn't be hung together. This particular RN hung a drug in the same line that blood was running. That was never to be done. Brought him in, said, this is what I read in the chart. Talk to me about this. Why did you do this? He said, I did it because I didn't think the blood would be harmed. And I said, but you took the chance that the cells would be lysed. And he said, yeah, but they weren't because the lab work came back fine. I said, it doesn't matter. You cannot do that. There's a policy about it. You know the policy. You cannot do that. And he said, well, I would do it again. And I was very blunt. And I said, no, you cannot do it again. And if you think you're above policy, then this is not the job for you.
That's a beautiful statement.
It's, again, through mentoring, I learned that when people said, I'm not going to do it, to say, then you're making a decision that you don't want to work here, because that is the ultimate decision.
How long were you director at the ICU at VMC?
For, I think, 8 years.
So, Leslie, your time at Valley Medical Center in Fresno, California as director of ICU. So you're there in the 80s. It's your first leadership position. Do you happen to recall like what your budget was at that time?
12 million.
It's crazy. What do you think an ICU budget is today?
Oh, many times that.
But absolutely. One of the things that we're hearing right now, because of, what we're seeing with the Trump administration and what I like to call the Doge economy, it's a good buzzword that I think is pretty powerful. And you and I have talked about this, and it's zero-based budgeting.
Mm-hmm.
And this is an important statistic to kind of piggyback on for everyone. So right now, and this is like early Q1 of 2025, 40% of the US hospitals right now, and there's about 6,000 acute care facilities, 40% of those are working with negative profit margins. So this financial strain is particularly pronounced with the 1,300 rural hospitals. But yet with all of this, with all of these financial constraints that we have in healthcare, doing zero-based budgeting is something that it's just like a naughty word. I can't think of a better way to say it. But yet in talking to you, this was the norm in healthcare once upon a time.
It was because we were a county hospital. So the county dictated they wanted no increase in the budget. So we were told, and in those days, you did your own budget. So I did the budget, and it took a long time to do that budget. But you started out with your staff salary and figuring out what is the base budget for your nurses. You didn't increase their salary at all. You started where you were. That was the base of your salary, and then maintenance on your equipment. And then you did a second budget with the salary increases, with what you needed to increase or purchase in the way of supplies, and you had to project forward. So you actually maybe did 2 or 3 budgets. I remember one year where I did the budget as we were staffed at that moment. And then I did a budget taking out the monitor techs and not putting in any new equipment, no salary raises, nothing. And then I did a budget where we actually put the salary in, put all the staff in, and put a normal budget. So I actually handed in 3 budgets because they wanted to know what you could do with as a bare base. And so zero-based budgeting became something we did every year and showed no increases. In fact, they across the board wanted you to do 10% cuts. And it was very difficult to do that with an ICU that was 24 beds with a staff of 100 RNs. So one of the things that I did was I took out the monitor techs. I mean, that was not easy.
I want to jump in. You're doing this before Excel, before Oracle, before any kind of software.
Yeah.
Are you pencil and papering this thing here?
Yep. And I will tell you how primitive it was, Nicole. I took large sheets of paper. So I took the large printer paper. I wrote down every RN's name, when they were hired, and what level they were on in the pay scale, and then projected out to their anniversary date and what they were due for in the way of a raise. And then did a total for the year of what their salary would be, including their shift differential or their weekend differential, depending on what shift they worked, so that I knew, looking at those sheets of paper, where we were with the nursing budget. And it was all done by hand. It took me days, weeks to do the budget.
I don't know if you were a CFO's nightmare or best dream, by the way.
I actually was their best dream because one year, this is a true story, but this is how things happen. So one year we were told across the board 10% cuts. I prided myself because we got a monthly budget report of where we were in the budget, whether we had overspent or not. And for 3 months in a row, my budget was out of whack. And I went to the CFO and I said, I don't understand this. I am never out of whack. And he started laughing and he said, no, you're not. And he said, what happened was for a 10% cut, executive cut the funding for the ortho floor. They just wiped them out and said they weren't going to be there. And I said, but they are there. And he said, yes, because we took the money out of your budget.
Of course they did.
It was like, what? And he said, well, you always come in at budget, so we figured you wouldn't notice. I said, I go over this every month with a fine tooth comb. What do you mean I didn't know? So it sort of was like, wow.
How much of overregulation do you think plays a part in the cost of healthcare right now?
Wow. That's a hard question, Nicole. Because having worked for CDPH, I think regulations are necessary and people need to be held to them. I don't have an answer for that. I really don't, because I see it from the perspective of places like VMC. VMC was the county hospital and took care of the indigent patients. Whoever showed up on their doorstep got care. And it meant that they had a lot of bad debt. And when you look at healthcare today, I mean, if someone shows up on your doorstep, you take care of them. You don't have the luxury of transferring them. And if that is someone who has no health insurance, then that's a bad debt. And how do you pull away from that? How do you have extra funding for that? And I think that's a real crisis that we're headed for.
Well, especially in the state of California. Absolutely.
Yeah. When you look at healthcare in the Central Valley, you have Modesto, you have Bakersfield, and you have Fresno. If the hospitals in between those hospitals go out of business, you're in a world of hurt. That is a huge Medicaid population and a huge population of people who have no health insurance.
So one of the things that's been getting a little bit of attention the past few weeks, you've got some billion-dollar hospitals, I'll use that as a cliche, that have just been funded or that are opening. Children's Hospital in Philadelphia, I think they're doing a 20-story tower. You've got hospitals being erected in this country right now that could be in Dubai. I mean, they're gorgeous feats of architecture and innovation and technology. But the rub with this, and this is what's kind of getting the attention, is people aren't getting healthier in those areas. And there isn't anybody in healthcare. This is not even a political statement, but we know the reckoning for healthcare is here. I mean, if we're talking about water in California, your reckoning has arrived. Thank you very much. Offer it a cold beverage. So looking at this reckoning with healthcare that we are in, are we even doing it right? Building these towers, building these hospitals? Like, what is the right move for healthcare right now? Because we're just kind of getting more unhealthy. Our life expectancy is dropping, our obesity rate. I mean, it's just a kind of a hot mess. So like, what's the answer here when we're looking at spending billions of dollars?
One of the things that struck me, Nicole, because one of the jobs I had, I took a temporary job in South Carolina. And what I realized in South Carolina was there is a population of people, mostly people of color, who had never received preventative health care as children. It is my personal belief that if you don't provide health to children, you will provide health care to them when they're older, and it'll be much more expensive. One of the things that we've talked about in this country for years, but we don't do a good job with it, is preventative health care all the way through life. If you provide good preventative health care to all people, then you will not spend the millions of dollars trying to fix the bad problems in later adulthood. That's something we've never reckoned with. We spend millions each year on things like bypass surgery, lung resections for people who smoked, diabetic care. And we should have done that when they were children. We should have set them on a healthy road, and we didn't. And we don't. As far as those,
ask you this. With Bobby Kennedy as our new Secretary for Health and Human Services, if you had one directive that you knew he was going to follow with unilateral support, what would that one directive be that you hope the HHS does during his tenure?
It would be preventive health care, so that we focus on health education, a good diet, exercise, and we start from the get-go. That has to be supported and funded for everybody. Not just for people who have health insurance, for everybody.
One of the things with this country, though, with healthcare that I am just frustrated with is we are so focused on this patient experience, as if every time we go to a hospital or to see our OB for our annual women's exam or a urology appointment for my husband, that we have to have a patient experience. And we get these results, the survey afterwards that everybody hangs their hat on. I think we're really missing the boat here. Concierge medicine, if you can pay for it, amen and God bless, right? Go have it. But the idea that everybody gets this patient experience and they get great quality health care is a lie. It's a complete lie that I think we're selling to the American public. There's some influencers I follow who are Americans who live in China. And one in particular that I follow, and we'll drop it in the comments below, she had a baby. She married a gentleman who's from Hong Kong. She had a baby. She goes in and your husband can't come with you on any appointment. You're just going and it's just one after another for these prenatal exams. They are churning these women out. They have strong, healthy babies in China. Patient experience, not so much. Not so much at all. You want to check in with patient access? It's a kiosk. Thank you very much. There's nobody there trying to get your information. So my question to you in this broad brush bit that I'm on, and I will get off my soapbox, is the necessity for the patient experience killing the outcomes because we're not seeing patients as quickly as we can and we're inflating our cost along the way?
I think you're right about inflating the cost. And I don't need a fancy room to be placed in. What I need is a doctor who's direct, who knows how to examine me and focuses on the problem. That's a good patient experience for me. I don't need the fluff.
Yeah, I don't need a warm blanket at my OB exam. Like, I want to get out of there. I want to get back to work. I want to go get a coffee. Like, get me out of here.
I think we need to get back to basics. I really do. Whether it's in the doctor's office or in the hospital, we need to get back to basics. This is a person that you need to care for. You don't need all the bells and whistles. It's basic care that they need. Give it to them.
Getting back to basics, getting back to that preventative care. I think that part of the culture that we've seen in the past, probably 20, 25 years, is everything has to be with such a gentle delivery. We don't shame anyone. There's never a negative conversation. And it's really, there's not a lot of accountability when we're getting these gentle softball, hey, you're a little overweight in a nice plush room, as opposed to, hey, if this doesn't happen, this is going to happen. This is how much that medication is going to cost. You might not make it to your kid's high school graduation. What would you like to do about this? We know a lot of physicians who would love to say it, and boy, would they be fired.
But you know what? I think it goes back to what do patients really need to hear? And they need to hear honesty. It's not a joke. It is your health. It is your life. It is the life of your family. Let me give you a quick example. Had a patient in the ICU who came in several times with GI bleeds from alcoholism. The social worker said, I'm not talking to him. I gave him the information about AA. And I said, okay. I went in the room. His wife said, I'll leave. I said, no, you won't. You'll sit right there. And I said, this is what you have. You have esophageal varices. If you eat a piece of toast right now, you're going to bleed. And it is due to your drinking. So you have a decision to make. Do you want to live or do you want to die? If you want to die, go on drinking. If you want to live, there's help for you. Make a decision right now.
What would happen if a nurse did that today?
She'd be in trouble.
She could lose he or she could lose her license.
Not necessarily their license, but they could lose their job. I certainly was blunt with patients. Sometimes when I felt that they needed it, I did have a family go to the administration and report me. And I was called down to administration. I said, this is what I said, and I'd say it again. People need to hear the truth.
I want to pivot to something as we're kind of wrap up towards the end of this. And this isn't going to be our only conversation, because I hope that we can have you and more of your colleagues here to talk about what nursing used to be and what it needs to be again. I want to talk about your time in hospice. What pivot to hospice?
First of all, I loved hospice. Most people say, how could you do that? The fact of the matter is, I think to be a good hospice nurse, you have to recognize that you yourself are going to die someday, and you have to be comfortable with that. What I tried to do with patients is talk about stages of life. There's something to be done, work to be done in every stage of life. And now you're at the point where you're dying. What are the things that you want to do, that you want to finish before you die? That is your job. My job is to keep you comfortable so you can do those things. That's a hard conversation, but it's also a gentle conversation. And I found that people accepted it really well. I don't think you can whitewash or make gentle the fact that this person is dying. They are dying, and there's work to be done. There's goodbyes to be said. There's things to finish up. They have work to do. And that's what hospice is all about.
Leslie, I want you to tell the story. I'm going to cut you off because you just reminded me of a story that is so powerful. And it's when you went to Ireland and you toured one of the hospitals. And I need you to give I needed to lay the groundwork of what an ICU is like in the US and what you saw and what year. And this is tying right back into hospice and why we as Americans die in hospitals and why the rest of civilizations do not die in hospitals.
So this was 1987. I went to Ireland. I was visiting my cousin Bridget, and Bridget had been sick. The family wasn't sure that she wasn't faking it. She had an appointment to go to the hospital in Ennis. She asked me to go with her. I did. They did an ultrasound. The doctor came out and told her husband and me that she had cancer of the liver. There was nothing to be done to take her home. They'd have the public health nurses come to visit her and keep her comfortable, but she was going to die at home. In the course of that visit, I talked to the doctor. He knew I was a nurse. I asked him if they had an ICU. He said, we have a 10-bed ICU. And he asked me about my ICU. I said it was 24 beds. And I asked if they had ventilators. He said, we have one ventilator. We haven't used it in 10 years. And I was appalled. I just was like, what? And he said, in this country, we understand that death is part of life. He said, when patients come into the hospital, not necessarily in the ICU, but when they're on the regular general floor, we expect families to come in and help bathe them. We expect them to bring their clothes in. We expect them to be there to feed them. If they have favorite foods, we tell the family to bring them in. When they go home, the family will take care of them. We accept death as part of life. So we don't put people on ventilators. If they're dying, we're honest about it. It was such an eye-opener for me. And Bridget did go home, and they made a decision not to tell her that she was dying, which also shocked me. They said, when she is ready to hear it, she will ask, and then we will tell her. But she's not ready to hear it right now. Complete change in how things were handled. And she did die at home. And about a week before she died, she did ask her husband, and she said, do I have liver cancer? And he said, yes. And she said, okay, now I know what I have to do. She died very peacefully with her family around her.
How old was she?
She was young. She was probably about 70. I consider that young. I have seen people in hospice die at home, of course, very peacefully. But I've also seen people die in the hospital. That's not where you want to die.
Why did we let that happen? I mean, I often think if I'm going to die in about 30 days or 10 days, just like, please get every needle out of me. Please just like, I want to be in my Egyptian cotton sheets and, I want my pillows. I want my husband. I don't want
Right.
that. Who wants that?
Exactly. And another story, Nicole, when I was at a small hospital, had started the home health department after I had been director of the ICU. And one of the surgeons came to see me and said, have the patient who has lung cancer, he has a chest tube in. We can't take the chest tube out, but he wants to go home. He's going to die very soon. And he said, can you handle that? And I said, well, we can handle it because I'll be his nurse. I actually trained my nurses. I actually trained his family how to change the chest tubes. I found out that the company that made the chest drainage set was going to charge him full price. I called them and convinced them that they should give him the chest drainage sets at cost and ship them to his house, trained his family on how to change the drainage sets. And his goal was he wanted to sail on his boat one more time. And I made that possible. The home health nurses made it possible. We trained the family, said, get in the sailboat and go. He was only home for about 3 weeks before he died. That's the way things should happen. Because why would he spend 3 weeks in the hospital when he was dying? Why would Medicare want to pay that cost?
Why aren't discharge planners and physicians discharging those patients?
I think it's a matter of setting goals for patients and working with them and figuring out how to do it. And that's not easy. And you have to buck the system. Medicare wouldn't pay for that man's chest drainage sets. And I actually wound up talking to Medicare about it. And they said, we only pay for reusables. And I actually spoke to a physician and said, we haven't used reusable chest drainage sets in 20 years. And he goes, yeah, we're slow. Well, yes. And you need to fix that.
All right. Last question.
Yeah.
It's been a huge career for you. And I know that you are still a mentor to a lot of RNs who are still in the field, who are still in leadership positions across the United States, years in nursing. What's your advice to the new grad coming out of nursing school and it's their first year?
Okay. You are going to be onboarded to a position. You need to assess your skills and you need to ask for training. You need to always assess and ask for training if you need it. The other thing is you need to set goals. Where do you want to be in 5 or 10 years? Now, you may not be able to do that, as a brand new grad right away. But as you work in a facility, figure out where you want to be in 5, 10 years and figure out how you get there. It's sort of like a roadmap. If you want to go to Seattle, how are you going to get there? What do you have to do? It's the same with your career. Don't be afraid to ask for informational interviews for positions you think you might want to have. And the biggest thing for me with any nurse is don't be negative. Oh my God, there is nothing that sucks the life out of a unit of nurses than everybody griping. If there is something negative, something that doesn't work well, then offer suggestions and find solutions. You are smart. Your colleagues are smart. You can find solutions to any problem. Don't just gripe about it. Quick example, home health, new starts of care. The nurse was given and this is in the early 2000s, nurse was given a paper packet of all these forms that had to be filled out. And the big gripe was we have to put the name and medical record on every single one of these pages. I didn't have a solution for them. One day, one of the staff nurses came and said, why can't the intake people print us a sheet of labels? So instead of writing this information, we can just slap a label on the page. It was like, that's a great idea. And we did it, and everybody was happy. Simple idea, but it came from a staff nurse. Staff nurses know solutions. Don't be griping. Find solutions.
Beautiful. Leslie, thank you for joining us. I really appreciate everything that you've shared today. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in to the Hunter Ambrose Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please follow, like, and share. And to everyone, take good care, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you.